overlooked area of women's health, and I'd like to welcome Katy Bradbury. She's a women's health specialist with nearly 2 decades of clinical and research experience. She has a background in nursing, public health, nutrition, anthropology, and she's absolutely passionate about translating complex science into practical, empowering advice. She focuses on helping women understand their bodies beyond mainstream narratives, with a particular expertise in the vaginal microbiome and ecosystem that plays a role in fertility, pregnancy outcomes, infection risk, and hormonal health throughout our whole life. In her talk, The Vaginal Microbiome is the Missing Link for Fertility in Women's Health, Katy will reveal how life stages, hormones, sex, stress, and lifestyle choices shape this remarkable internal environment, and how small, simple changes can make a huge difference. This session is your chance to gain insight into a truly game-changing aspect of women's health. So if you please join me in welcoming Katy Bradbury.
Thank you. Yes, so I'm Katy. It's really, really nice to meet all of you and see some faces in the crowd. And I jumped at the opportunity to come and speak here when I heard that there was this big microbiome event going on, because the vaginal microbiome is often missed out from microbiome conversations, and indeed from health conversations generally, you know, and it's a bit of a sticky term. It's, you know, people feel a bit embarrassed talking about their vaginal health, and I think that's part of the reason. But actually the vaginal microbiome has got a really building body of exciting research behind it, and we need to start talking about it more, you know, and being a bit more open about it. So as I say, I jumped at the opportunity to come and speak, and my background is really, it is working in women's health. So I came through a bit of a meandering journey of women's health. I started as a nurse and a gynecology nurse originally, and then I retrained as a health visitor. I was just talking to you about, and that was working with mums and babies. So everything that Jules was saying in the last talk about the baby microbiome was really, really poignant to that part of my career and my work. And then I moved it when I trained in nutritional therapy and started working in private practice for in women's health. The reason the vaginal microbiome became really prominent for me was because I was mostly working in fertility. And in fertility, in the field of fertility, the vaginal microbiome is a really overlooked piece of the clinical puzzle. And so we've got people who are struggling to conceive, and vaginal microbiome, like when they go to clinics, if they go to their GP, if they go to a fertility clinic and an investigation's done, it's so rare. It's starting to edge its way into clinical conversations, but it's really rare that the vaginal microbiome is touched on. And actually what we're going to find out today is that the vaginal microbiome has got really significant implications for fertility, for pregnancy outcomes, and indeed just for wider health across the lifespan as well, particularly poignant for people who are in perimenopause, menopause and beyond. So why the vaginal microbiome matters, hopefully I've given a bit of background there already, but you know, there are, in terms of actual infections, vaginal infections, there are millions of women who are living and suffering with vaginal infections on a day-to-day basis. And as I say, because it's something that is linked to a part of our body that we often feel embarrassed to talk about, people often feel embarrassed to seek the right help, you know, and that's a real shame. And I think even in clinical settings, a lot of people who experience recurrent infections like thrush, BV and UTIs perhaps feel a bit embarrassed to accessing the care they need. Maybe they'll go to the doctors once, twice, 3 times, and if it just keeps coming back and the solution that they get offered is just antibiotics, and it keeps returning, eventually you're going to give up. And I see this a lot, I see a lot of people giving up and losing hope and faith in their care, because they're not getting the care that they need. And as I said before, these things affect quality of life. If you're living with recurrent infections like this, massive impact to quality of life. But also fertility, pregnancy. As I said before, when we're thinking about fertility and pregnancy, we're looking at not just risk of being able to conceive in the first place, but also risk of keeping that pregnancy. And lots of later stage pregnancy losses are linked to the vaginal microbiome. And I think one of the things that I want to touch on here, just as a note, is to say that when we're thinking about the vaginal microbiome, I think, perhaps a slightly political statement here, but I think that women hold a lot of guilt, right? Women get blamed for a lot of things, and particularly when we're thinking about fertility and pregnancy, a lot of the time it's the women are taking the burden of that on their shoulders. But actually, when we're thinking about the vaginal microbiome, what we're looking at is the reproductive microbiome as a whole. And the vaginal microbiome, for people who are sexually active, they will share reproductive microbiome. So this isn't just about the person with vagina, So I just wanted to give a nod to that. So yeah, massively linked to overall health and well-being, and yet often overlooked. So what is the vaginal microbiome? So we've had, we're at the very end, on the last talk of this amazing festival of the week of Inside Out, where we've been talking about the microbiome as a whole, and so lots of people have been coming and talking about specifically the gut microbiome. I think has been a big one, and the vaginal microbiome is similar. We're thinking about the ecosystem and the community of bacteria that are living in our bodies, and they live in ideally in symbiosis with our bodies, in the same way that the ecosystem of a forest hosts bacteria and fungi, and that's a part of their comprehensive ecosystem. But also we're thinking about sorry, I lost my train of thought there. It's the community of bacteria and other microorganisms. And what I was just going to say there was that we have different microbiomes in our body. So the big one, the one that we know most about, the one that's got the most research behind it, is the gut. But we've also got the skin has its own microbiome, the vaginal tract. The urinary tract has its own microbiome. Like in men, there's a semen microbiome as well. We know now that there's even a respiratory microbiome in our lungs. So the research is really escalating now. It's quite an exciting field to be in. But essentially, that's what it's referring to. And I always like to use the analogy of a lawn when I'm thinking about the microbiome, because what we're wanting, if you think about a really, really nice, thick, luscious lawn, what we've got is grass growing nice and thickly and lusciously. But what happens if there's patches, if that lawn becomes patchy, and its weeds will grow? Like, weeds are opportunistic in nature, right? And so what will happen if we've got little patches, any patches that aren't thick with the lush grass, that's an opportunity for an invasive species to come in and think, oh, well, here's a spot for me, I'll grow here. So when we're thinking about any of the microbiomes, really what we're wanting to do, like the key thing that we're wanting to do, is promote the growth of the lawn, promote the growth of the bacteria that we do want to be there. And yes, things around antibiotics, antimicrobials, like getting rid of unwanted bacteria can be an important part of the clinical picture. But a part that's really often overlooked is building the lawn, crowding out so that we don't let the opportunistic species in. So what does healthy look like when it comes to a vaginal tract? Now this is where it differs slightly from the gut microbiome, because in the gut what we want is a really big plethora of species. We want the gut to be host to all sorts of wonderful species. The vaginal tract is a little bit more selective, and there's a reason for that. So ideally we want a healthy vaginal tract to be populated by lactobacillus. And lactobacilli are one of the keynote species that we do find in the gut. But the reason it's really important in the vaginal tract is because it creates this acidic environment. So what the lactobacilli do is they eat their food. We were talking in the last talk about prebiotics, and that's what helps to feed healthy microbes. And then, just like the rest of us, they have excretion, right? And so what they excrete is lactic acid. And the lactic acid is then what helps to create a mildly acidic environment in the vaginal tract. And that's really important, because if we think about the vaginal tract as an area that's potentially exposed to the outside world, right? So if we think about other parts of our body, like our veins and our arteries, they're really well encapsulated, they're really well hidden and protected from the outside world. But if we think about our gastrointestinal tract, for example, we're eating and drinking through the day, every day, so there's lots coming in from the outside world. And similarly with the vaginal tract, particularly for sexually active people, that's a place where foreign things from the outside world can enter the vaginal tract, right? And so it needs to be protected. So in the gastrointestinal tract, we have our stomach acid, right? Our stomachs are really acidic, and that is then what helps to protect the rest of our GI tract from infection. But with the vagina, it's not as acidic, but it's what the lactobacilli do is create this pH of about 3.8 to 4.5, and what that does is help to prevent unwanted pathogens from getting in. So we want it to be dominated by lactobacilli. There are a few different strains of lactobacilli that I'll talk to a bit about if I have time. And essentially that creates this stable environment. But the signs of a healthy vaginal tract, and this isn't a comprehensive list, but ideally we want there to be little to no odour in the vaginal tract. And this is a sensitive topic, because a lot of the time people have odours coming from the vaginal tract. That can be a sign of infection, but then we're really embarrassed to talk about it, and we think that it's it's a sign that I'm not clean enough, or we have all these kind of strange associations, and actually it's nothing to do with that. And actually there's a bit of a vicious cycle that I see a lot of people getting into, is they notice an odour, they get extra vigilant with their cleaning and start to purchase products from the supermarket. And don't get me started on these products, this whole aisle of pretty products now that we have available in the supermarket that is selling things that are deeply disruptive for our vaginal microbiome. Yeah, and they're advertised as being like a lot of the time they're advertised as pH friendly, but like they're there's a particular product, I can't remember what it is, but it's a vaginal wash, or like spray, it's washes, sprays, all these things that are allegedly to help clean our vaginal tract. But the vaginal tract is actually self-cleaning, and not many people know that. Yeah, and so the best thing that you can be washing your that part of your body with is water, and we get caught in this trap. So no odour, ideally, little to no odour, comfortable, having being comfortable down there. If you're uncomfortable, and that can be anything from itchiness, pain, redness, inflammation, soreness that may be there all the time, or it might come and go, but also like pain during sex, pain on urination, like all of these kind of things are signs that there is an imbalance somewhere going on in that part of your body. And regular discharge. Now, this does beg the question, what is regular discharge? I don't have time to go into that today, but ideally we don't want to have vaginal discharge that is like green or too yellowy. Like sometimes a tinge of yellow is okay. For people who are menstruating, you would expect that you would have more discharge in the middle of your cycle when you ovulate. but outside of that, then perhaps not a huge amount of discharge. So if you're getting discharge throughout your menstrual cycle, then that can be a sign. But again, like white, like cottage cheesy type discharge can be a sign that something's wrong as well. So knowing your body, understanding what is normal, what's not with regards to smells, discharge and level of comfort is really important. So dysbiosis is talking about when there's an imbalance of microbes in the vaginal tract. And so dysbiosis can create risk to fertility, pregnancy and gynecological health. So when we're thinking about, I've already spoken about the fertility side and the pregnancy side, but in terms of wider gynecological health, this isn't just about living with infections and what that means for your quality of life. If you've got recurrent infections going on that planet, it puts you at greater risk of things like PID, pelvic inflammatory disease, yeah, and also cancer, certain cancers. So this isn't just about feeling a bit uncomfortable some of the time. It's got much wider repercussions than that. So some of the common conditions associated with vaginal dysbiosis, just to name a few of them, so we've got BV, bacterial vaginosis is a really common one. This is an overgrowth of anaerobic bacteria. It's usually associated with a fishy odour and discharge, sometimes a greeny coloured discharge. Thrush, again, another really common one, so that's largely caused by yeast, usually candida, and the classic sign of that is itching, and it's a really hard one because it's horrible to feel itchy in that part of your body. It's horrible to feel itchy in any part of your body, but down there, you know, especially when you're trying to just get along with your daily life, it's really difficult. This can be associated with that kind of cottage cheesy consistency discharge, and often people suffer with the thrush and the yeast infections after a course of antibiotics. So a lot of the time people will go and go to their medical provider, get antibiotics, whatever that might be for, could be linked to the vaginal tract or otherwise, and then the rebound from that is thrush. And it's because the antibiotics have disrupted that microbiome, and then allow the candida, allow this opportunistic species to come in. Because what happens when we take antibiotics, of course, yes, they're great at clearing the, arguably great at clearing the infection. Sometimes they're not so great because we've got the rise of multi-drug resistant antibiotics now. But it also clears everything else, you know. So these really important microbiomes that we've got in our gut, in our vaginal tract, in our lungs, our skin, the antibiotic therapy will disrupt all of that as well. And so then it's thinking about that analogy of the lawn again, that really lush lawn that we want going. If we don't have that lawn, if that lawn has been mowed to within an inch of its life by the antibiotics, then opportunistic species are much more likely to come in. Ureaplasma and mycoplasma. Now these are less well known. They are often asymptomatic. And that's a really interesting one because people often think, oh well, I'd know if I had an infection. And as I said, I worked in the fertility space for a long time, and so we had people saying, oh well, I don't have any symptoms. Why would I need to be doing a test like this? Because I'm fine down there. But what we found a lot of the time was that this ureaplasma and mycoplasma could be living in the vaginal tract asymptomatically. And what we know about ureaplasma specifically is that it can impact pregnancy outcomes. Yeah, so it can impact both fertility, it can impact every stage of the IVF journey in terms of likelihood of IVF working, and it can impact risk of miscarriage. And it can be passed back and forth between partners very easily, and it's a tough one to get rid of because it doesn't have a proper cell wall. So it's, you know, there's some tough clinical things to deal with here. Now, this is really important, this next point here around the risk rises at menopause. And the reason for that is because our vaginal microbiome is very much linked with our estrogen across the lifespan. So once we start getting to the stage in our perimenopause/menopause journey where estrogen begins to diminish naturally, what happens is that we lose the protective effect of that estrogen. Now, I think it can be really frustrating for, a lot of the time when I talk to perimenopause and menopausal women, because they realise that again, this just doesn't get spoken about. You know, it doesn't get spoken about, and actually, estrogen, we have estrogen receptors in every single cell in our body, every single cell. So for people who are going through the menopause, often they feel hit like a ton of bricks, because there's just not that awareness that actually every part of the body can be impacted by menopause. So in this particular case, then the loss of menopause, of estrogen in menopause, means that we have, it shifts the microbiome, so we have fewer of these protective lactobacilli and a higher infection risk. And often these are missed in standard swab testing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about testing shortly. But yeah, these are often missed and often have false negatives in standard swab testing. So if you were to go to a GP, for example, or even in the hospital and have a standard swab, which is done, it's then cultured, a lot of the time the standard culture swabs can miss these. So, hormones, life stage, diet, lifestyle, all these things that we've been hearing about throughout the festival this whole week. Also personal hygiene, which I'll touch on, genetics, immunity, medications, they all shape the vaginal microbiome. It's not just about that part of our body. It sits, the microbiome sits on an axis with everything else. You know, with our nervous system, with our immune system that Jules touched on earlier, and then like things around our diet and lifestyle massively impacted. Personal hygiene that I was saying before about these lots of vaginal products that are available now, even things around our like our menstrual products can impact the vaginal microbiome, and intercourse, of course. So. It's there's a lot going on. There's a lot that can actually shape this, but it also does mean that there's a lot that we can do to support it. Yeah, so there's plenty of hope. I'm not going to go into too much detail here. If there are lots of clinicians here today, I might have spoken about a bit more about the community state types. I don't think it's in the interest of time. I think I'm just going to skip past that one today. But testing might be really useful to know about. So when I said in the previous slide that standard cultures are limited in the information that they can give us. So a culture is where you do a swab and it goes to the lab and it's left for 24 hours and you see what grows, and after that 24 hours you see what's present there. It's good because it's really accessible, it's affordable, you know, you can get it on the NHS, that's kind of what's widely available. So that's the pro of the culture swab. But the con, is that it misses things. It's not a comprehensive test. It can be a nice little clinical indicator, but it's not the be all and end all. We then have, perhaps on the complete opposite end of that spectrum, which is particularly relevant in the fertility space, is this Emma and Alice test. Now these are biopsies, and these are used specifically to look at the reproductive microbiome. So for people who have had recurrent pregnancy loss, for people who have got long-standing unexplained infertility, they might go, this is only available privately of course, to a fertility clinic, and they might suggest that they do a biopsy and have this Emma and Alice test, and what that does is look a lot more comprehensively. So, but it's expensive and it's really invasive, you know, it's not a pleasant procedure to have. So it's that's again, like upsides and downsides to all of these. Then you've got the third one here, which looks a bit confusing because of all the letters. But what this means is we've got PCR. So if you remember from the COVID days when we did our COVID testing, we'd have a PCR test, and the PCR COVID test was the one that was the most reliable, right? And that's because it looks at the actual genes of the bacteria that are there. So PCR testing is extremely reliable. And then there's a step up from PCR testing even, which is NGS testing, which is next generation sequencing. Now the pros of PCR and or next generation sequencing testing is that they are really easy to do. They are at-home tests. you get sent out a test kit, you do a swab at home, you send it off to the lab, and then you get the results, right? The cons are that, they are only available privately, so they cost about £200 to do, so they're not accessible for everyone. But the benefit, particularly of the NGS testing, is that so PCR testing has tests very, very reliably, but they have like a limited list of bacteria that they're testing for. The NGS testing is comprehensive. They have a database of, I think, about 200,000 microbes, and so if it's there, they're catching it, and they also test for yeast, so it's not just bacteria that they look at, it is yeast as well. So this particularly the brand that I usually use for this is Screen Me, and they have I find Screen Me exceptionally good. It's incredibly useful data to work with. The downside is that if you are doing some of these more complicated tests, it's a really good idea to work with a practitioner as well, because otherwise you can just get this data and it's then like, okay, well, I don't really know what to do with that information. And there are also things about doing the tests and shoulds and shouldn'ts that you should do beforehand to help your body prepare for the test and be as reliable information as possible. And then finally, just a quick nod to the cheap and cheerful pH tracking. So pH tracking does not look at microbes at all. But if you remember at the start, I spoke about the fact that a healthy vaginal tract will be mildly acidic. And so the pH testing, it's literally just buying pH test strips, right? Ideally buy ones that are suitable for the vaginal tract, because they will be like CE tested for use in that part of the body. But yeah, you just really cheap at home, and what you can do then is just check to see whether your vaginal pH is sitting in that mildly acidic range, and that can be a really nice intro point to just see, kind of, do a bit of literally a litmus test on the overall health of your vagina. So in terms of how to support a healthy microbiome, again, like so many of the amazing talks that we've had this week have been talking about how to support a healthy microbiome in terms of things around our diet, and Jules was talking about prebiotic foods. Really, really important to include prebiotics. Prebiotics are the things that feed our microbes, right? And so if we're not getting enough prebiotics in, then we're literally not feeding that lawn, and the lawn will starve. So prebiotics come from, like, all we need to think about is this diverse range of plant foods. If we're eating a diverse range of plant foods, like challenging ourselves to have like 30 different plants a week, 50 different plants a week, these are all amazing ways to make sure that you're hitting both your polyphenol intake and your fibre and prebiotic intake to help support these microbes. Gut health as well. You were doing a talk on mindful eating for gut health. Like, don't underestimate the importance of being calm at meal times. Like, it sounds so silly, but if our nervous system is activated all the time, which, let's face it, in the modern world it often is, if our nervous system is constantly activated, then when we eat, our nervous system is either in active, sympathetic, fight or flight mode, or it's in calm, rest and digest mode. And if we're in rest and digest and we're calm and mindful when we're eating, it really does make all the difference to the way that our bodies are actually able to assimilate nutrients, and also to feed that gut microbiome, and to just interact with the ways in which our gut and vaginal and brain axis all sit together. So really, really important to think about that. But general health, we can't. This is one of the things that one of the reasons that I left gynecology nursing actually originally was because the practice that I was seeing was, it was as though each person was just a reproductive tract. And so people were being treated as though they were just a vagina or just a set of ovaries or just a uterus. And of course that's not the case, you know. There are those parts of the body are connected to these wider systems that all interact and talk to each other. And then there's a person with a lived experience at the end of all that as well. And that is just so important to remember. So thinking about our well-being really holistically and not underestimating the power of a nutritious diet, of managing our stress, of having good relationships and connections with other people, all really important things to not overlook from a systemic point of view. And then, like hormones, as I said, it comes at the perimenopause, and there are other points in the lifespan where estrogen might be in decline as well. So, for example, people who have a missing menstrual cycle, hypothalamic amenorrhea, and other hormone imbalance conditions as well, where estrogen is on the low side, and it really can be disruptive for that microbiome. So things that can support there are, you know, yes, there are systemic hormone therapies available. I can't comment on that because I'm not a prescriber, but you know, lots of people do go down that route for estrogen support. But also just like knowing that we get these hormonal shifts, knowing that the decline of estrogen means that there is then a disruption potentially to the vaginal microbiome, and taking some probiotics, you know, can be really helpful. And there are some amazing women's health vaginal probiotics out there now that can support this really beautiful ecosystem in the vaginal tract to help to crowd out like that lawn, to help nourish that lawn, to crowd out the bad bacteria. Local interventions, so I said before, avoiding scented products, avoiding like douching, and these kind of things. Cotton underwear, like don't underestimate the power of using cotton underwear. That part of our bodies do not like synthetic fabrics, you know, and really what we're trying to do is minimise like sweating in that part of the body, because if we're sitting in a sweaty part of the body all day, then that is going to impact the microbial growth. Safe period products. So again, like if you're thinking about if you are like using inserting things into your vagina like tampons, then making sure that you're using organic cotton tampons. Even those have, you know, blew up in the media earlier last year with showing that they had all sorts of heavy metals in them. So it's, you know, it's difficult making decisions over menstrual products. Lots of people are now using period pants, for example. But if you are using period pants, it's really important to change them about 3 or 4 times in the day, which makes them a bit less convenient to use. So, you know, just lots of considerations here. And then, like personal hygiene. So it sounds so basic, but making sure that you wipe front to back, you know, because what we don't want is to translocate bacteria from the anus and poo into the vaginal tract. So really, really simple thing to do, make sure you wipe front to back. Washing your underwear at 60 degrees, especially if you're prone to infections down there. If you're washing your underwear at less than 60, then things can still dwell in your underwear and spread. What else on the personal hygiene front? Just knowing, as I said before, that if we're thinking about intercourse and sexual partners, that we do share a reproductive microbiome with our partners. So it's and so this is thinking about beyond the classic kind of typical STIs that we might be thinking about. It's just knowing that, you know, who you choose to share that part of your body with, you will be sharing a microbiome with as well. So just knowing that, and knowing that the only real protection from that is barrier protection, and that if you do have vaginal health issues and you are sexually active, then and you're going down the testing route to see what's there so that you can be treated properly, ideally both partners need to be tested and treated. Yeah. And then, probiotics, I think I've mentioned already that strains, specific strains, so all of these, the L stands for lactobacilli, and these are the 3 most researched strains of probiotics. So L. crispatus is the one that is so in the healthiest vaginal tract, L. crispatus is the dominant species. And then L. reuteri, C14, and L. rhamnosus, GR1, are also really well researched in terms of supporting that vaginal microbiome as well. So there are some really nice products out there. I will say, if you're someone who has struggled for a long time with recurrent infections, probiotics can help, but they might not cut the mustard. Yeah. So if you are someone that struggled, ideally, you know, if you've got the wherewithal, then going down the testing route to actually really see what's going on and working with a practitioner who really understands what they're doing with regards to the reproductive microbiome is, you know, it's really important, and it changes lives. You know, so if you're lucky enough to have access to those resources, then it is a nice thing to do. So I think, yeah, just to say, like, we think about, oh, well, the vaginal microbiome might just be this tiny little clinically insignificant thing, but hopefully this has just given a sense that actually it's not just about infections, it's about quality of life, it's about fertility, pregnancy, lifelong women's health, risk of future disease. As my previous talk, Jules said, it's also linked to our infant health as well. So because our babies are born mostly through the vaginal tract, that then it has implications for that baby's reproductive, that baby's microbiome. So it's about shaping the next generation as well. And so, yeah, I feel like I've just spewed information at you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, brilliant.
Oh, thank you. I'm here.